Right foot to top. Doncaster Rovers have done it.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I am the CHALL, your Doncaster Rovers fan, and welcome to this DRFC Daily Reports, bringing you the latest news on Doncaster Rovers Football Club. Today, we're going to be speaking about a couple of very interesting topics here, and it's going to be quite, excuse me, long discussions. So not long, but you know, there's a lot to digest from what's come out today. So we're going to be speaking about the appointment of Richie Wellens as Leyton Orient head coach or manager, and something specific he brought up in his press conference. Now, credit for the video that I'm about to react to in a couple of minutes' time. It, of course, goes to Leyton Orient Football Club themselves, because this is their live stream that I'm reacting to, or part of it. Not all of it, just a little section of it. We're also going to be talking about a fan blog that was revealed on the Free Press. And I want to read it out live on YouTube because it sums up, I think, exactly what the situation is at the club at the moment. So, you see by the title of the video, you know, I wouldn't say that Wellens slams Doncaster. I wouldn't say that he slams the club, but I think that, like I said, like the title says, there's red flags. I think it says red flags. So please like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell so you don't miss YouTube video. Let's get straight into this one. Let's start off with our first story, Richie Wellens' Leyton Orient press conference, and a very specific section of that conference. So let's have a listen.
And then obviously Doncaster in League One with COVID and having to recoup the losses that they lost from COVID. That was a really tough situation. But I probably made a mistake in going to Doncaster, if I'm being honest. I let my heart rule my head. There was a lot of red flags there, but listen, it was a club that I loved and I had a great time there in terms of a player and had a great relationship with the fans. So
that bit there, we just said it about the choosing the heart over the head and the red flags at the club. I mean, I'm going to look at this from both sides in a little bit more detail, but let's just carry on.
So it was very difficult for me to turn down in terms of it was a club that was definitely pulling on my heartstrings, and in hindsight I should have done it.
So that's what Richie Wellens said about Doncaster and the club, and you know, heart over head, why he joined it. Let's analyse what he said in a bit more detail. So I thought I'd give a bit more analysis to what he said in more detail. Basically, it was on the line. Basically, for those of you who need like a short little summary of what he said, basically it was just chose the job heart over head, saw there was red flags at the club, or knew there was red flags at the club. Now, the thing, and you could define red flags in many different ways. You could define red flag as not a high-budget club, which, let's be honest, we're not. You could define red flag as a lot of issues going on upstairs, which I know a lot of fans have been screaming about for years. And especially this season, there's been people slowly turning into Baldwin outs, Blunt outs, Bramall outs, those kind of, you know, that kind of group, should we say. I wouldn't call them a minority because they're turning into a 50-50. You know, if we're not careful, we keep making the same mistakes, they're going to keep turning into 50-50 and go over the 50-50 if we're not there already. But red flags also mean the direction and what was promised to him, the manager. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's now 2 or 3 that have called out the club on its mistakes. Well, not specific mistakes, but just say we've got mistakes at the club. That's now 2 or 3 managers that have come out and said about it. Paul Dickoff came out in that press conference. I believe Darren Ferguson came out about the budget. I think it was either McCann or Moore that came out about the budget. And now Wellens has come out about red flags at the club. Now, he did say before, you know, the recuperation losses from COVID, and that hasn't helped. But it still makes you think, you know, that's 2, 3, maybe nearly 4, that's nearly 4 managers coming out about red flags at the club, issues, things that weren't promised, things they were told to lie about, like into the Paul Dickov podcast interview, about how, sort of, forced to lie pretty much to the public about the budget he was given when he was brought in as manager. And, if you sort of take those managers into question, Darren Ferguson, Paul Dickov, Richie Wellens, and one of Moore McCann, well, I think both of them must have called them out. I'm not too sure if Moore or McCann or both of them called them out, but one of them I think definitely did. But definitely Ferguson, Wellens and Dickov. Dickov was a defensive manager, didn't like his tactics, but he was still a football legend. Darren Ferguson is a good League One manager. Championship level, still yet to prove himself in my opinion, but I think maybe one day he'll get there. And Richie Wellens, proven League 2 manager, League 1, again, needs a bit of time. So, they have qualities, these managers. They're not the greatest managers of all time, let's be perfectly honest. They're no, they're no Ryan Lowe. They're no Paul Cook. They're no Paul Warne. Not the greatest League One managers, but they have some qualities about them. And each one of them have come out and said there's issues, there's red flags, there's lies, there's things, there's etc. No, I'm not saying I'm completely turning against the board. I'm not. I'm not one of those people. No way. I'll always respect for the fact that they kept the club alive. That's one thing that people always forget. They kept the club alive. Without them, we wouldn't have a football club to support. And that's more important to me than... That's just as important to me as being ambitious. That's just as important, surviving as a football club. So, for me, I'll always respect them for that. For me, though, survival isn't the be-all and end-all of a football club. You've got to be ambitious. We are going to go on about the fan blog, which links actually into this story quite nicely. But I feel like, I don't know, that's another manager that's come out and called out the club in some way or form about red flags at the club. I don't know. Now, of course, you can look at it both sides. You can look at the other side as Wellens didn't really use the budget properly, spent on Rowe, Close, those players, and then sort of didn't have much left over. But then you could have said, if the funds were available, why didn't the board release them sooner to get a striker? The deadline day was a shambles in the summer. We all know that for a fact. And it's part of the reason why we're in this mess in the first place, where we're facing relegation to League 2 for the second time under this regime. In the 8 years of this regime, we're facing 2 seasons in League 2. In the space of 5 years, let alone the 8 years they've run us as this regime, John Ryan never got us relegated to League 2. We spent 1 season in League 2 under John Ryan, and that was back-to-back promotions from the Conference to League 1 in the space of 2 years. We nearly dominated that league back then. So, now we're facing 2 seasons in League 2. I think we were sort of a Championship League 1 well, not really yo-yo, because we spent 4 seasons in the Championship under John Ryan, but back then we were a decent Championship asset, and then we had the experiment, we got relegated, went back up to the Championship, and I thought, okay, go like a little bit like Rotherham are now. We're sort of going to be like a Championship League 1 yo-yo. Then John Ryan got overthrown, got stepped down, which we all know, with the whole consortium stuff, and he wants to move the club forward. Other people didn't. We know that for a fact. He got overthrown. He had to step down. Also, he's John Ryan, felt he couldn't put more money into the club, so he stepped down himself anyway. And then we've had the last 8 years of the current regime, and the rest is history. I think this summer is crucial for the football club in terms of its direction. Now, this brings me on nicely to the second story, and that is the fan blog on the Doncaster Free Press. This brings me on nicely. So let's see what has been said. So this was written by Jack Manship, and it says as follows: "It's easy now for Doncaster Rovers fans to sit and berate certain decisions the club has made over the last 12 months or so. But the root of Rovers' failure this season stems from multiple issues, some of which are undoubtedly down to club decisions, and some of which are simply just uncontrollable. The two key factors for me are poor player recruitment and the injury crisis which has blighted Rovers all season. Finally, there's already been enough talk about Wellens' tenure, whether or not it was the right appointment in the first place, in brackets, it wasn't, and whether or not he was dismissed too late into the season, in brackets, he was. But he's not the only responsible for Rovers spending the entire campaign in the drop zone. Some fans have also been quick to jump on Gary McShaffrey's back, blaming him for not carrying us to safety, but since his arrival has been an upturn in results and lifting morale, hope was provided. I'd agree with the notion that Rovers' issues began long before Wellens arrived, but the pre-season should have been the platform for the club to start fresh and push on. But in somewhat typical Rovers fashion, the club has gone backwards. Players' recruitment in the summer was disappointing to say the least. It reeked of a lack of direction and backbone. We were left with a decent squad that lacked any notable quality players. Sure, some players that have joined the club have put in some good performances and shown some ability, but overall the squad seems disjointed. While replacing Whiteman directly was always going to be next to impossible, the failure to sign a genuine defensive midfielder is a small yet crucial detail, and just one example, which has played a massive part in Rovers shipping so many goals and offering little going forward. A failure to bring in a few more experienced players didn't help either. The reliance on loan players, which we, the Rovers fans, were assured wasn't going to be the case again for this season, is indeed the case again. This is down to the aforementioned lack of backbone in the transfer market, as the club missed out on key targets too many times. The January window offered some hope with fresh faces coming in, but it was always going to be impossible for the club in the drop zone to bring in high quality players who should be playing at the other end of the league. Regardless of which league Rovers find themselves in next season, a fresh approach is required. One with direction and identity, one that offers the fans hope and something to be proud of. I think that's a very, very interesting statement. And I think that this, for me, sums up this season and sums up the last couple of years of direction. Now let's share my thoughts on what's been said and also my thoughts on the way the club is going. There we are. So that was the official fan statement. Now, I wanted to bring this up. I wanted to bring up something very interesting. I think it links to the story brilliantly. This is the Fan Engagement Index 2020-2021. So we've got three categories: dialogue, governance, and transparency. First of all, not a surprise that the big clubs like Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham, and the Manchesters are further down. But whereabouts are we on transparency? We're at the same level as Man United. We're at 15 for transparency. 15 out of 100. In terms of other categories, dialogue and governance is at 60 and 65 respectively. So we are in the top 10. We are in the top 10. We are behind Norwich, Reading, Newport, Lincoln, Wimbledon, Carlisle, Cambridge and Exeter City. We're ahead of teams like Plymouth, no idea why, but they've got more transparency than us. We're ahead of Swansea, but they've got way more transparency than us. We're ahead of Leyton Orient, who is Richie Wellens' new club. We're ahead of the big six, the greedy six, I guess. The transparency is what lacks it for me. The transparency in terms of the transparency of information and how it transpires, the transparency of information, with fans, between the club and the fans. What's the transparency like? From the graph, you can see it's been poor. Very, very poor. That, for me, has to be a factor. We've got to improve the fan transparency, the fan club transparency. How much the fans and the club are linked with the information. If something is contractually disallowed to be talked about between the fans, fair enough. If there is stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, but you're not contracted to keep it silent, tell us. Tell us what's going on. And this would put a lot of the owners out people in a bit more solidarity with the situation. If the ownership is staying, but they're making wholesale changes and bringing in football people to run the football side of things, tell us. Now or in the summer, tell us. If the ownership could be on the brink of changing, unless you're contractually obliged not to do so, tell us that there's a strong possibility there'll be new owners next season. If the ownership isn't changing, but they're going to bring a brand new financial benefactor into the club, tell us. Whatever's happening, tell us if you can. Because the transparency needs to improve with fans. It really, really does. And I'm sure the club will try and find new ways of improving that. But, again, you've got to really look at it here. And, you know, on the new owner stuff, you know, I just want to speak about this. Would I want a billionaire who wants to run a football club up the pyramid and get us to the highest places and things like that, and invest loads of money into the club and take the club up and have us competing in Europe in the next 2 decades? Of course I would. Of course I would. But that realistically isn't going to happen unless some $1 trillion miracle comes along, or €1 trillion miracle, or £1 trillion miracle, or trillion Danish crony miracle. You know, whatever currency's out there. Trillion miracle, we'll call it. Just to involve every, you know, let's be currency neutral here. Involve every currency. A trillion miracle. Billion, more realistic. But let's be realistic. That's not going to happen unless something miraculous happens. Let's be brutally honest here. And I'm not saying don't say owners out. That's your opinion. Keep saying it. You know, I love seeing people with different opinions. The best fans are ones that have different opinions. Because if we all thought the same, spoke the same, you know, felt the same as each other, you might as well be made out of robot parts. You might as well be living under a dictatorship. You might as well. I like different opinions. I love different opinions. Absolutely love it. Love it. You've only got to look at the Cheltenham fan cams. Kenny from Chicago says it was abysmal. Kitty says Cheltenham weren't exactly better than we were. We just didn't play well. They didn't play as good, but they still battered us. So I love different opinions. I love it. Shout out to Kenny and Kitty, and also Lizzie as well, that was with Kitty on the fan cam. You know, I'm not saying to the owners out, stop saying it. Keep saying it, because I love different opinions. And this is a fan channel. Everyone's welcome to a different opinion. But to be brutally honest, I don't think the ownership's going to change unless they retire or someone strips back the money. Well, I wouldn't say strip back the money, but you get what I mean. Like, if Bramwell says one day, that's it, I've had enough, I want to retire, stop putting money into the club, retire and live a happy life. If he says that one day, fair enough. He was involved in the glory years, we'll clap him off. We will clap him off. If Gavin Baldwin said one day, I want to resign, or if Bramwell says to him one day, let's start changing things around here, you're gone. I'm not going to be one of those that says good riddance Baldwin. I'm going to say, and this isn't me, you know, speaking from the club, this isn't me paid by the club to say this. Gavin Baldwin is a wonderful guy. I've met him numerous times. You know, I've always rated Gavin as a person. As a CEO of a football club, yes, he's made some bad decisions. Yes, he has. You know, specifically when it said in the fan blog there, we were assured that we wouldn't rely on loans, and surprise, surprise, we are again. Not as much as the previous season, we had about 7, but you get what I mean. We're still relying on them more than we were hoping for. So there was some promises broken, but he goes with my respect, with my personal respect, that he was a great person. He kept the club alive when we were £10 million in debt. You know, I'll always respect him for keeping the club afloat and having a football club for me to support too. And he goes with my best wishes. Some people will say different, some people say worse. That's their opinion. If David Blunt says one day, I'm going to retire, I'm going to leave the club as chairman, someone getting a new chairman. You know, I spoke to David at the Meet the Owners event. Kind guy. He goes with my best wishes. Might not have done some good decisions sometimes. Made some good decisions, made some bad decisions, but overall, nice guy. He goes with my personal respect. I'm not going to slag him off. I'm not going to send him out heckling and booing him and abusing him. That's for other people to do. If you want to do that, feel free. Feel free. Do I think that abusing people that leave is the answer? No. But it's your life. I don't tell you what to do in your life. You go and lead it. You know, it's your life. The consequences are yours. Whatever happens. But, you know, they wouldn't go with my disinterest or my abuse. They would go with my personal respect. Because they're nice people and, you know, they're good at stabilising the club. That's the one thing they're good for. They are great self-sustaining businessmen. You know, people have told me numerous times they're rugby people, they're not football people. Fair enough, they're not. You know, they might like the club, they might love the club because they work for them. You know, they practically own it. You know, I think Bramall said in the past he wouldn't give his 33% stake in the club to anyone else unless he trusts them. So clearly he has trust in Gavin Baldwin. You know, whether that trust is repaid or not, you know, it's up to people's opinion for that. But I think that in terms of the status of the club and the direction, I think we have to be brutal here with the owners. You know, whether I like them or not, you know, you'd have to be brutal here. You know, and if it was me, I'd be going straight to that office in the summer and thinking, look, and this is whether we stayed up or we get relegated to League Two again. We have been relegated or just stayed up, but it's a wake-up call. The current approach didn't work. The transfer approach in the summer, especially, didn't work. We got out of jail, and we need to stop this from happening again. We need to think forward, not backward. What do we do? If it was up to me, I would personally go for this fresh approach. If I was Gavin Baldwin, David Blunt, Terry Bramall, fresh approach. Okay, the old approach, we admit, come out to the fans in the summer and say, you know what, the old approach, you know, the 4 weeks applications and the approach that we did to appointing a manager, fair enough. It didn't work. It didn't work. So what do we do now? What do we do now? Whether Gary McSheffrey's manager next season or not, what do we do now? If Gary McSheffrey's not manager next season, and Frank's either gone back to the academy or left as well, then, you know, the first step is to appoint a manager, you know, before pre-season starts. And let that manager see what the club's about. Now, if Gary McSheffrey is not here next season as manager, I pray that him and Frank are in the coaching setup for the manager, or they're involved in the club in some capacity, because Gary McSheffrey and Frank Sinclair are two amazing gentlemen. I want them involved in the club no matter what happens, whether they stay on or not. I think it's 85% likely whatever happens, Gary McSheffrey will still be manager next season. Am I upset about that? No, I'm not upset about that, because I want Gary McSheffrey to be given a fair crack. If he isn't manager next season, fair enough. But if he is, I won't be sad about it, because I want him to be given a fair crack and given a second transfer window to see what he can do for the start of a season. Give him a full pre-season with the squad. I won't be upset either way. You know, I'll be happy with either decision. So imagine if Gary McSheffrey did not stay on as manager, they either went back to the academy or left. To start the fresh approach, if I was the board, I would be like, right, square one, what do we need to do? Appoint a new manager. What would the approach be to appoint a new manager? If the old one didn't work, think of a new one. I'm not the expert here. I don't have the answers. If you've got any answers, comment down below. I don't have the answers. I'm not an expert. I would just have a fresh new approach of appointing a manager. Don't spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks delaying it. Have one ready to announce. Have one signed on the dotted line. Yes, it's easier said than done, but find a way of doing it that satisfies everyone and brings in a good manager. Now, if we are bringing in a new manager next season, no matter what, bring in someone who does not know the club. Someone who can learn to love the club, like Bielsa learned to love Leeds United, like Klopp learned to love Liverpool, like Nathan Jones learned to love Luton. Chris Wilder learned to love Middlesbrough. It's a Steve Cooper learned to love Nottingham Forest. It's as simple as that. Simple as that. The next thing I would do is football staff. Clearly, the current approach of just a head of talent recruitment, no real scouts, and the CEO, in my opinion, helping out with football decisions, clearly that approach isn't working. I would like the CEO to see the football side of things, but not 100%. I would like Gavin and Bramall and Gavin Baldwin, Terry Bramall, David Blunt, and the backroom staff on the business side of things to deal with the business side of things, the financial side of things, keeping the club afloat. But I would then have the football staff of Doncaster Rovers, which means director of football, it means scouts, a proper scouting network with 2, maybe 3 scouts minimum, a chief scouts, which could be the talent identification head in a new role. I know some clubs have a loan manager. I've seen that, by the way. I have seen on club staff, they do have a loan manager. That's an actual job role in football. But that's sort of like the higher end of football, so I wouldn't worry about that. But all these are genuine job titles, scouts, chief scout, etc. Director of football. Or a technical director, DOF or technical director. Would I appoint James Coppinger as director of football or technical director? If it ties into what he's doing already, then yes. If he doesn't, then no. Because I don't want him to be responsible for any buys that don't work, any transfers that don't work, and him to ruin that lovely legacy of his, because he's got a lovely legacy at this football club. Sean O'Driscoll's available if he was willing to come back. Brian Flynn's available if he was willing to come back. In fact, I think I had a couple of director of footballs listed on my notes, actually. I'll just go back through them. I think the unrealistic fan in me says Steve Walsh. You know Steve Walsh. Haaland for $4 million at Everton. That's the unrealistic choice. The dream choice, if we had unlimited amounts of money, would be Steve Walsh. But you're talking, Coppinger improving his role. You're talking Nicky Butts if he wants to come in as a technical director or director of football. I think he'd be good because he's worked with the youth down at the United. So I think that Nicky Butt would be a nice choice as director of football, or maybe one of the experienced managers. Look at some of the most experienced names in football: Mick McCarthy, Nigel Atkins. People like that. They don't want to be a manager anymore. They can go into like a technical director or a director of football route. That's what Sean O'Driscoll did. So for me, that would be the direction I would go in: the football staff, the director of football, the scouting network, etc. then I'd bring in the right players. Players that do not want to play for the money. Players that want to play for the badge. Players that are talented. Now, we are not a major spending club. We are a selling club. We are a hidden gem club. We found the hidden gems. Ben Whiteman, John Marquise, Tom Anderson, Cameron John to an extent, people like that. So, for me, I mean, Taylor Richards as well. You could count that. Jacob Ramsey on loan as well. You know, we're not going to over-rely on loanees, but there's a couple of loanees like Ramsey and I guess Richards that have been hidden gems for us. Sam Johnstone as well. Sonny Dieng, you know, goalkeepers that have been here have been brilliant. We're a hidden gem football club and a selling football club. Let's use the selling club to our advantage. Bring in the hidden gems. Raise the price tag. See what they do on the pitch. They do good, brilliant. If they don't, fair enough. But don't sell the good talent for peanuts. If we let go of Ollie Younger and Joseph Alowu and people like that at the end of their contracts and their additional years, if they choose to pursue them, for peanuts rather than a fee, after how good they've been so far at the moment, then what's the point? What's the point? Because you're not bringing any money in. You're relying on off-the-pitch money rather than relying on the pitch money as well. You know, sell them for a price. And it's easier said than done again, but, you know, it can't be that hard, can it? So there's many things the club could do. Many things the club can do. So that's I've said my piece on the situation. But there we are, guys. That's going to be it for this daily report. Make sure you do like, comment, subscribe. And for now, I am the CHALL, your Doncaster Rovers fan. I know a lot of people were against Richie Wellens' reign, but I have a personal respect for him as a friend. Good luck, Richie, at Leyton Orient. All the best, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.
Right, foot to top it!